Hello everybody, we're here for another tech repair with Alex and Paul. Hey Paul.
Hi.
What have we got today?
Well, today we have a Scott 222 tube amplifier, a very nice one, early 60s, 6BQ5 outputs, decent transformers. This one's been rebuilt some years ago fairly nicely. Customer brought it to me that it didn't have any sound. Well, I checked everything. The B plus is there, the tubes, most of them are lit. And what I found is that the preamp tube filaments are not lit. There's 4 12AX7s, 2 for the phono and 2 for the tone circuits. And they are heated with the DC current off of the 6BQ5s. So here is a cautionary tale if you're buying a used Scott 222 amplifier. There's an A, B, C, and D model version of this amp. And you probably do not want the A model because it heats the filaments off the 4 output tubes with a fixed bias scheme, no bias adjust, no balance adjust on the bias. And what they have to do is get 48 volts constantly flowing out of the 6BQ5s through the filaments to heat them. Well, when the tubes are new and everything's perfect, this might have worked. This amp is probably fine till the BQ5s aged a little bit and somebody put 4 Russian 12AX7s in it. And after finding out all the resistors were good, the outputs were good, the bias was right, I backed up and thought, let's find out what these tubes are pulling. And sure enough, the Russian 12AX7s are pulling 165 milliamps. They should be pulling 150, 148, so it can't heat them. I had to modify the circuit to get enough voltage to heat those tubes. Let me get the right schematic. This is it. This is the A model. And they take the cathodes through resistors and capacitors, heat the tubes, and they go to ground. There is a resistor right here, a 1.2K to ground, as sort of a dummy load to make sure the voltage stays at not more than 48 volts. Well, the solution turned out to be to take this resistor and change it to a 10K. That got it up to 43.5 volts, which is enough to heat the tubes, given about 45 seconds of turn on time. Sounds great beyond that, no complaints. They changed the caps. I had to rechange the cathode capacitors. They'd been changed with Japanese ones and they had died. The cathode resistors were discolored. Some of them were out of tolerance. I changed them with new metal oxide resistors so I know the cathodes are correct. Bias on each tube between cathode and grid, 10 volts, that's about right. Everything else checked out fine. But if you go to the B model, they went to a similar scheme. The cathodes heating the filaments, but they stole some voltage off the B plus to a 20-watt resistor. That's not my favorite scheme, but that gives you a little faster heating, takes a little bit of the dependency off the output stage for voltage to heat the filaments in the preamp tubes. And there's a bias adjust. And this is not negative bias, this is positive bias, because the tubes are biased up to keep enough current flowing to heat the filaments. But at least this one gives you a little bit of adjustment to get the filament voltage right. Still not a good plan. The C and D models did it right. Bridge rectifier, good filtering, minus 48 volt source, heat the filaments, no problem, and adjustable bias balance for the output tubes. That's the way it should have been done. The D model is virtually identical. I think all they did was put bigger output transformers in it. But bottom line is, Russian tube filament specs are not necessarily to American tolerances. And I spent 2 days in this going, why can't I get enough voltage to heat these filaments? Everything seemed to be right. Then I put the tubes on my laboratory power supply, which measures in milliamps, and found out the tubes are pulling more current. I can put American 12AX7s in it, and it heats 15 seconds faster with the modification. Now, I could not get this amp to heat even American tubes the way it was drawn. And I don't find anything else wrong with it. That was the only solution, was to lift that resistor and raise its value so that it doesn't load the power supply. Amp sounds great. I put test waves through it and square wave through it. It's a sweet sounding amp. If you like that warm, smooth, soft tube sound, you probably love this one, because working, you've got those tubes pushed up in close to, not A, they're AB type output, because they're idling high enough to keep those filaments heated. A good amp, the idling current would be low until you hit it with some sound. But this one's idling pretty high, so it's good for the sound. You have DC heating the filaments in the preamps, which is preferable to keep down hum. But it also shortens your output tube life. And with tubes becoming expensive and scarce, that's not a good thing. I'd rather have the C or the D model that has the bridge rectifier with the bias for the outputs and power for the filament, so that you can keep the output tubes running at the minimum needed current without the filaments starting for voltage. So I thought that was interesting.
That is very interesting.
This is mint condition, beautiful amp otherwise. I mean, this is classic Scott.
Okay, I guess that's another tech repair with Paul and Al.
It's just something to look out for if you're dealing with these. There's all kinds of schemes to get like free DC to heat preamp tubes with. And there's a lot of these cathode current things that have been done over the years, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But for 12AX7s in series, that takes 48 volts. And that's a pretty hefty job. And the day it was designed and built, it probably worked. But I'll bet you these amps were in the shop a lot over the years, because they warmed up slow, or one channel was weak, or, you know, the output tubes age, you've got no way to compensate for it. This one does have an AC balance adjust on the phase inverter. I'll give it that. You have a little control over the balance of the output tubes, but you can't adjust bias, you can't adjust current. So you're limited in what you can do to compensate for an aging tube.
Well, that's a good repair, Paul.
I thought people would find that interesting and useful.
It is.